Mr Deputy Speaker, for years Queenslanders have told their stories about youth crime, and for years we have listened. We've listened to mums tell stories about having to try to ask a child to go to bed when they know that in the period leading up to that, someone has been in their sacred space. We have listened to stories from tradies who have told what it is like to go to the front yard of a property and find out that the vehicle you need to make a living is not there because it's been stolen overnight, and the complications that come with not being able to earn a living, the rigmarole with insurance, the rising premiums, the inability to get to your next job. We've listened to small business owners, some of whom have been destroyed 6 times in 2 months, and the cost that comes with having to have the disconnection, your casual staff member not getting a shift and then they can't provide for their family, the rising cost of insurance to try to keep the doors afloat. We've listened to parents and grandparents who have told us what losing a loved one is like. I've listened to Queenslanders who have been at events where they are having an argument about whether or not the smart move is to hide your keys under the pillow so that maybe the person who is going to break into your home doesn't find them and moves on, or should you leave them at the front door so that that offender doesn't walk past your child when they're asleep in the front room. There are the conversations Queenslanders are having right now. And if you listen to the government, the only thing we've heard is that it's either a complex issue or it's happening everywhere. Well, that's cold comfort for the person who it happened to them. And there are thousands of them, in numbers that we've never seen before, in a level of anger that we've never seen before, and they want action, and they deserve it. And this government has repeatedly stonewalled at every suggestion that has been put forward. Every suggestion. And then the rhetoric changed on Boxing Day. Not because their heart was in it, but because the community stood up as one and said, enough. And only then did we hear anything about the need for stronger laws. But it turns out that this wasn't about the government doing what the community wanted. It was about relieving a political issue. And what we read in the Greens proves that. And not since the asset sales of over a decade ago has a cabinet torn itself apart on an issue as much as it has on this one. To the point,
Mr. Deputy
Speaker, that policy... Mr Deputy Speaker, to the point that policy is being done on a trade-off.
Member for Pine Rivers is warned.
We'll give you breach of bail if you're willing to give us weakening drug laws. That's what governing in this state has got to. That's what governing has got to. Transactional governance. And the proof, Mr Deputy Speaker, is on breach of bail. For 2 years, a conga line of ministers lined up to say that breach of bail would never be on their agenda. The police minister, the attorney, the deputy premier, the premier. The one I feel most sorry for is the tourism minister, who was wound up and set up the day before they caved like cannon fodder. Before the deal was done, the trade-off in cabinet, he got sent out like cannon fodder. And then for the police minister to say that somehow our suggestion that the shadow police minister put forward wouldn't work, well, it was copied word for word. We were talking about breach of bail, and we were talking about amending the Bail Act. Word for word what the government's finally doing. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, that doesn't change the fact that when you look in the Greens, you see that this isn't an issue that the government believes in its heart. This is an issue the government wants to somehow limp across the line and convince Queenslanders that they've listened. I'm going to ask, has the Premier listened to the Queensland victims that we have? The children scared to sleep? The tradies who can't earn a living because their car is gone? Husbands who have lost wives? Grandparents who have buried unborn children? Because we've listened to them. We've listened to all of them, and we've given them a voice, and we're going to continue to give them a voice, because when we look in the legislation, and at the centrepiece of it all was this so-called lifting of maximum penalties, well, there is nothing that is changing in here at all. And the question is pretty simple. What did the Premier mean when she said on the 27th of December, and I quote, "Violent juvenile car thieves will face 14 years jail"? Well, that's not the case. That's just not the case. The Premier went missing in January when Queenslanders needed her, and she has missed the mark with these laws. They're not even the laws that she promised Queenslanders. They're not. They're not. Read them. There is a disconnect in what the government is saying in its media release and then what it is trying to dog whistle to other groups and what is in this legislation. So here are some questions. How many repeat offenders will be sentenced to 10 years jail for car theft? How many will be sentenced for offences committed at night to 14 years? How many? How many engine immobilisers will be fitted by this time next year? How many young offenders, now between 15 and 16, will be fitted with GPS trackers? Because the legislation looks very similar to the one that it's only delivered a handful so far. When will the 2 new youth detention centres open? When will kids no longer spend time in watch houses for weeks on end? When will we know the government's plan to overhaul early intervention? There's some questions that the Premier could outline in her contribution, and I look forward to the Premier's contribution in this regard. Because I'm going to say one thing, Mr Deputy Speaker, really, really clearly. The opposition is going to continue to fight for a balance when it comes to fixing the youth crime epidemic gripping this state. And it looks like this: consequences for action, unshackling the judiciary and removing detention as a last resort, and gold standard early intervention. Because right now, Queenslanders are being failed at all ends of the Youth Justice Act. The kids who are holding a knife at someone's door, who are ramming police, they are being failed with the weak laws. But so too are we failing the pipeline of future crims by not getting in early and doing the proper gold standard early intervention that they deserve. Queenslanders deserve action. Queenslanders deserve the government to listen to them. Queenslanders don't deserve to be some sort of pawns in a political game of trade-offs between different factions of a government at war with itself. A government whose backbenchers will sign breach of bail, who will sign a petition about breach of bail and then squirm out of it. A government whose backbenchers will say they're coming to Parliament to take on the very laws that the government will be implementing. A government whose own ministers are prepared to leak against the police minister for bringing PowerPoints into a cabinet meeting. That's what we've got to in Queensland. We've got to the stage in Queensland where everything is about management of the media. This government has stopped listening. This government no longer sees the issue as an issue of law and order. They see it as a political issue because they are in survival mode. Well, do you know who else is in survival mode? Queenslanders. Queenslanders who just want to know that when they go to bed at night, they have the right not to have someone climbing over the top of their children's bedroom. Queenslanders who just have the right to know that the youth they work hard for to get up in the morning and go and earn a living, to keep a roof over their head, might be there. Queenslanders who are paying higher insurance premiums, Queenslanders who have never felt more unsafe because of a lazy government.
And this time's expired.